Alrighty, hello everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. And congrats on figuring out the Zoom breakout room situation. Appreciate you being here. We are here together for the A2 session, which is about centering student leadership and engagement. So for centering student leadership and engagement, here's the layout of the session for today. So each presenter will introduce themselves and share some thoughts and experiences around students as the living, breathing heart of a DCC. We're asking the question, considering how DCCs owe their existence in a large part to student activism, how are students engaged and centered in the work of a DCC? And then at the end of the time together, we'll have some time for questions, brainstorming, Q&A, and just general discussion. So we have 3 presenters today, and we will start off with Dan. Feel free to take it away.
Thanks, Javin. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dan Darkow. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a white male with brown hair. Sitting behind me, there is my power wheelchair, and the background behind that is a white wall and my kitchen, which is highlighted in a reflection from my saltwater aquarium. Today, I am calling in from Oxford, Ohio, as I work at Miami University. So bear with me as I describe Miami University's land acknowledgement. Miami University is located within the traditional homelands of the Miamia, spelled M-Y-A-A-M-I-A, and Shawnee, spelled S-H-A-W-N-E-E, people who, along with other indigenous groups, ceded these lands to the United States in the first Treaty of Greenville in 1795. The Miami people, whose name our university carries, were forcibly removed from these homelands in 1846. In 1972, a relationship between Miami University and the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma began and evolved into a reciprocal partnership, including the creation of the Miamia Center at Miami University in 2001. The work of the Miamia Center serves the Miami Tribe community and is dedicated to the revitalization of Miami language and culture and to restoring that knowledge to the Miamia people. Miami University and the Miami Tribe are proud of this work and of the more than 140 Miamia students who have attended Miami since 1991 through the Miamia Heritage Award Program. And with that, I'm excited to share a little bit about my time working at Miami, but also being a part of the creation of the Disability Cultural Center. Was on a presentation yesterday where we gave a little bit of a background and history regarding how our cultural center came to be, which really speaks to today's presentation, where students are at the heart of a cultural center. And that's where ours came to be, was through student activism on campus. And my relation to that is, at the time of a lot of the energy around our cultural center, I was one of the advisors to our student organization on campus, known as the Students with Disabilities Advisory Council. And I also serve as an adjunct instructor in our disability studies program. And that's one of the biggest catalysts at Miami for student activism related to disability, is students that are not only engaged in understanding their own disability identity, but also as they grow in their understanding of the socio-political nature of disability and claiming disability. A lot of students find themselves enrolling in disability studies courses and really opening an entirely new mindset related to their disability. And we really see that that educational component as being monumental in identity development. And really from my standpoint, then seeing it from a student development lens, when students are engaging in coalition building with peers, it's really amazing to witness. So I was a part of that in working with students, and through their activism, they really were the ones that propelled the university to move forward in creating this space that is now our cultural center, which is located in our disability services office because of monetary funds that we were given and a location that is central to the university and prominent and really easily accessible to all those involved. So when I think about how students are engaged in our center, a lot of the work that our center and the cultural center does is specifically around what are the goals of the student organization and how do they want to promote disability identity, culture, and community across campus. So our students are actively engaged in looking at what are ways to bring in not only disabled speakers, disabled artists, disabled creators to campus to build their own understanding of disability, but also balance how are we bringing in non-disabled folks into the conversation to increase their understanding of disability as a powerful identity. So each semester, they are coming up with new ways that we can expand the reach of the cultural center, whether that be through external presenters, but also smaller events that may take place on campus. We've seen multiple tabling events where students will increase awareness of the cultural center and what the cultural center has to offer in terms of multimedia resources, educational components, different things like that. And they will do tabling in our student union, for example, where they'll have little educational components related to disability, related to inspiration porn, for example, things like that, where they really want to share out what are, how has the evolution of understanding of disability changed and matured over time, and really reshaping that narrative of disability from a historic lens that has been harmful to the community. So they will get out there and do some of the activism and advocating for the disability community. And something as simple as having access means to me, and have students taking photos with that and kind of creating a visual photo wall is one way that they've done a tabling event that has gone over really well. And you can kind of see that final product, and really looking at that from a holistic standpoint really is a powerful endeavor there. So that's certainly one way that we've been able to garner support is through spreading our knowledge across campus. In addition to that, when it's time for our students to want to get together in community with other disabled students and kind of just share out, they have a really great time talking about what are things that they're facing just as students, but also how does their disability play into that. And those are spaces that they can feel that they're not going to be judged for any of the experiences that they're having on campus. And it's a safe place to come and kind of just talk about that. So over the years, it's been called different things. Most recently, some of the students just called it rant night. So they would have different rant nights, and they would talk about different things that they're experiencing on campus. And that's another way of building community, sharing similar experiences, and using each other's knowledge to really think through, what are ways that we can create a more accessible environment for everybody. So I know that has also been helpful for many of our students moving through the cultural center space. I want to wrap up a little bit here in the next couple of minutes, just talking about what does it look like for the relationships that students are making, not only when they're in the center, but across campus. We know that many of the students that find community through the cultural center and through our disability student organization on campus are meeting folks in other spaces because they're involved in the cultural center. And what I mean by that is they're getting involved in some of our larger diversity organizations and making sure that disability is part of those conversations. So one organization through our associated student government is the Diversity Affairs Council. And now through the development of the organization and the cultural center, there is a seat on the Diversity Affairs Council for a disability representative. And that's something that's been really important, in terms of not only representation, but also collaboration across campus. And through different events, we've been able to partner with some of these other organizations on campus and really elevate not only disability, but the various ways that disability intersects with multiple identities. So that's been really powerful, and having collaborations with our Center for Student Diversity, for example, and all sorts of different offices and organizations on campus. That has been really well in terms of how we're getting our resources and space out to students that may not necessarily just drop by a cultural center or the disability services office, but really making sure folks are aware of what resources and community can be found within the cultural center. I will wrap up now with just talking about some of the ongoing concerns, things that we continually have to talk about. Is what does longevity look like? What does student burnout look like? We know there are so many things that come into play when students are involved in all sorts of areas across campus, and we want to be mindful of that and making sure that it isn't just one student leader that is holding all of the resources and holding all of the labor associated with making sure the cultural center is successful and continue on. So we do want to make sure we have plans in place to continue the longevity of the center, not specific to an individual person, but to the institution as a whole. So with that, I believe I will pass it on to our next speaker.
Thank you so much, Dan. Really appreciate you just describing how students are involved in various ways and at different levels infrastructurally as well. And yes, we'll go on to Sylvie next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sylvie Rosenkalt. I use the pronouns she, her, hers. I'm a white woman with brown hair, wearing a black t-shirt and glasses. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I have a couple of slides just to keep my brain organized. So I'm here. I was a graduate assistant and then program assistant at the UIC Disability Cultural Center. And my main project that I worked on was creating this internship called the Community Care Cohort, which was sort of our answer to a lot of questions we were having around specifically engaging undergraduate students. And in a more long-term way than just coming to one-off events. So I wanted to share a little, just high-level description of the Community Care Cohort. It's a 2-year internship where we have students really go through these 4 themes of exploring political care work and mutual aid, then apprenticing, so partnering with different community organizations and activists around Chicago, and then in their 2nd year, taking on leadership and mentorship roles for the incoming interns, sharing the co-facilitation and sharing the work of governing the internship. Okay. So how did we get here? First, we started by asking our students who were already involved what they wanted. And we did this through having a town hall. And we basically wanted to gather the people who were already invested in the DCC, and we did a lot of mutual visioning and thinking about the future together. So we broke up between student and faculty, and there were some significant differences in what student wanted and versus what faculty wanted. Students prioritized wanting to see the DCC as a facilitator of mutual aid and as a resource hub, as a space that helps people beyond just educating people. They also wanted a space to casually get together and to be in community with other disabled folks and learn this sort of insider knowledge that could be passed between, we called them generations of students. So this was a great starting point for us as a staff to think about building a program that would meet these needs. But I also want to bring your attention to this graph on the left, which shows who was at the town hall and were they a graduate student, an undergrad, or a staff member. You can see that we had 21 staff members attending, whereas we only had 3 undergraduate students at this town hall. We had 8 graduate students. So we're noticed that we were reaching professors and we were reaching the graduate students, and we were having trouble reaching undergrads. This totally makes sense when we looked to the research. So just like Tony Saia and Liz Thompson presented yesterday, they wrote an article together where they said that many disabled students don't learn about disability as community they're connected to and an identity to celebrate until they encounter disability culture in college. And we know this disavowal is even greater among students of color. We can look to Dr. Akemi Nishida's research, who is a professor at UIC, and she writes about the disavowal of disability as an identity and source of community being accelerated as activists had a hard time locating and connecting with other disabled people or communities that explain disability as anything other than a biomedical problem. When they did find a community of disabled people, though, most of these activists explained that these communities were largely represented by white heterosexual men with mobility impairments. So what does this teach us? And what's the practical application? We know that if we did outreach where we specifically said, are you disabled and proud? Come join this internship. We would end up with a disproportionate number of white students compared to our population, which at UIC is majority minority campus. And we were seeing this happening when we did outreach where we required that people identify as disabled, that we were ending up with a disproportionately white group. So we wanted to do specific outreach to people who didn't identify as disabled, but who fit under our definition of disability. And I wanted to just read our application question that asks about this. So we said, because the internship is based on interdependence and relationships of solidarity, we wish to center people who identify as having lived with experience of body minds that don't conform to norms about what a body mind should be or do. Briefly describe your lived experience with disability, madness, deafness, neurodivergence, trauma, mental illness, chronic illness, and or otherwise having a non-normative body mind. The terms you use and the way you use them are up to you. So I just wanted to share that as a practical nugget of how we tried to outreach to folks who didn't already identify as disabled, but who actually were the students that we were looking to serve. And the last thing I'll share is just an encouragement to embrace the political. On this slide are two images from the DCC's social media. One says abortion rights are disability rights, and one says keep the Quad Center accessible. And then there's a lot of smaller text that you can't read on the slide. So just from the national level down to whatever is happening on your campus, having an authentic, taking a stance authentically from a position of disability culture and disability politics, and being visible in that stance, that helps build those bridges of solidarity that bring students into you. And so, for example, this Quad Center accessibility protest was a effort led mostly not by students at the Disability Cultural Center, but students at other cultural centers, Heritage Garden interns, which is an environmental justice internship, Anak Bayan at UIC, the Mexican Student Association, the Azatlan. So it was really a group effort, and that's how we build those bridges, and that's how we reach out to students. So my last slide is just some suggested articles that I found really helpful. I know my slides will be available, so if you're interested in looking into those, they'll be available with the recording. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvie. That was super interesting. And it's been honestly quite an honor to see your CCC program blossom over the past year that I've been at the DCC. So congratulations to you on the success of that program. It's incredible. And Aysha, we'll turn to Aysha Razzaque.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Aysha, and also Eid Mubarak to those who observe it. I use she, her pronouns. I am the former president of the Disabled Student Cultural Center at the University of Minnesota, and I'm now an alumni advisor. For visual description, I'm a 22-year-old mixed East Asian and South Asian woman. I'm currently wearing a shalwar kameez, which is a traditional Bengali dress, and mine is black with a bunch of red, pink, and gold flower embroidery. So I'm wearing the dress plus the scarf around my neck. I have long black hair parted sort of to the side, black glasses, and then I'm also wearing white AirPods. Behind me is a white wall, and then it just has a family picture of me and my sisters when we were younger. And then over here, a window with a cream colored curtain and sort of blue and green beads hanging off of it. And yeah, I identify as disabled also. I identify as autistic and ADHD, so I'm not visibly disabled unless you look really, really closely for a long time. And also thank you to Dan and Sylvie for covering like a lot of good points about making those connections with the students. I think I'm speaking mainly as a student myself, because at the UMN, our Disabled Student Cultural Center is completely student run. So we don't have any sort of official oversight from a staff or community members outside, even though they are welcome to participate. We are completely student run, and also almost all undergraduates. I'd say maybe 9 out of 10 board members are undergraduates. So a couple of points that I kind of want to cover that they're mainly speaking from my experience in reaching out with students is that two things I found helpful were I put it down in my notes as look to the future and back to the basics. So the first one, what I mean by look to the future is that what I mean is that rather than only speaking to the students who are currently at the institution, one thing we found helpful was speaking to prospective students. A lot of them are high schoolers who, if they haven't identified as disabled already, they might be finding out diagnoses or trying to find an identity that fits with them. And the Disability Cultural Center can play an important role in helping them facilitate a secure sense of identity and finding a sense of community within the school that they're looking to apply to. They're more likely to come in if they know that they have somebody who understands them. And they also familiarize themselves with the structure of the group and the resources offered early on. So it helps mitigate a lot of future problems that somebody who is unfamiliar with the disability resources provided wouldn't otherwise encounter. And the second point I had that I worked with this a lot, especially in the last couple of years, was sometimes even though it may seem redundant to us, it's important to go back to the basics of what does it mean to identify as disabled and what is disability justice, especially when you are talking to international students and those coming from places where disability is still highly stigmatized or widely unacknowledged. A lot of cultures, especially at the University of Minnesota, we have a high East Asian international student population. And I know that a lot of those cultures still look at the medical model of disability where it's a deficiency and it's something to be either hidden or overcome rather than embraced. And going back to the basics of explaining that, it's not shameful to be disabled and not all disabled people look a certain way and that there is huge diversity within the community. Again, this feels like basic information for us, but for a lot of them, even if they have a disability, it's very much new. And I think a huge key to bringing in students and getting them involved in DCC spaces is understanding that we're all coming from a wide spectrum of knowledge. Like when I first came to the University of Minnesota, I would say on a scale of 1 to 10 of how knowledgeable I was about disability justice, I was maybe a 2. So it's really important to sometimes to speak in terms that they understand and get a feel for what they already know and build from that, build the conversation from there. And then one last point that I found helpful was working with other student cultural centers is so important. At the U of M, we believe that access is not just a disability issue. At the core, access is about these systemic barriers that have been placed in front of you on the basis of your identity. and that that principle can extend to other cultural centers, other races, religions, gender, sexuality, and using that principle as a foundation helps us build those bridges with other cultural centers through the mutual understanding that we're all in the same boat, and that we're all, in a sense, fighting for access. And I found that even just the smallest things and smallest events can help broaden these connections and sort of strengthen these connections. Like I remember last year or last semester, Autism Acceptance Week is something that we do every year in the month of April. And this year, we wanted to do something different and make it more intersectional. So we opened up the dialogue to how is neurodiversity viewed in other cultures, and what autistic people have faced in other minority groups. Yeah, and I think a big part of why that was a success is because the people organizing it, the board that was organizing it, a lot of them belong to other marginalized identity groups too. And there are these unique issues within different sub-communities that disabled people face. So, so a key to building bridges with other cultural communities, and Sylvie kind of mentioned this with how a lot of disability activist groups are mainly white heterosexual men. It's to really gain a diverse range of disabled voices, and just having diverse backgrounds, even if sometimes people contradict each other. I think it's really important to still hear out different disabled experiences, because it gives us a fuller picture of what we are contending with, and how and the different ways that we can approach different issues within our community. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Aysha. That was a great presentation. Learned so much about, cross-movement solidarity and intersectional programming, and culturally, as you said, about international students and students beyond, like culturally responsive education, and yeah, a lot of great material there. So thank you for sharing, especially from your experience as a student running a student-run cultural center, which is very unique. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you to all our panelists. We have about 22 minutes for Q&A, so that's great. There's quite a bit of time for Q&A. So I am going to open up the chat. Let me change that right now. Okay, I've just opened the chat. So anyone who would like to raise their hand, or they would like to type in the chat, I can call on you or read your question. If you prefer to be anonymous, you can direct message me and I will keep your comment anonymous. But yeah, feel free to ask questions. Yes, Rachel Stewart.
Hi. So I have a couple of questions. The first one is for Sylvie, and I'm wondering if you would be willing to share your outreach statement that I think you read it, that really is the one that kind of is designed to also capture folks who may not currently identify as a person with a disability. So that's my first question. And my second question is for Aysha. This is a first that I've heard of a DCC that is completely student run, which is just awesome. So I'm wondering if you are aware of other DCCs that have a similar model.
I guess I can go first. So from what I do know, there are no like university established DCCs that have a similar model, but in a lot of surrounding schools, there are student organizations that are student run and center around disability, but they're on a much smaller scale. I know there are some in Wisconsin. I know of one in Utah and some in California. And I know about a lot of these mainly through friends or friends of friends. So these sort of like multiple degree personal connections. That's kind of how I know about them. And a lot of them, they are different from the U of M's in that they're not acknowledged officially by their institutions. So they're basically on par with any other student group like dance club or language clubs. And a lot of them have expressed frustration about it because their lack of a platform at their schools means a lot of the issues that they raise fall on deaf ears. And yeah, I think the U of M is kind of a unique case in that even though we are student run and we can say and do what we want independent of the university things, we're still backed by our school's funding and we get space in the union. So I guess, it's kind of a unique situation.
Thanks. Aysha, something you said about friends of friends reminded me of another outreach strategy I wanted to share. So I did put the statement in the chat, but you reminded me that, so we did have a pretty strong network of graduate students. And one thing that grad students are a lot of the time is TAs. So we did reach out one-on-one to all of the graduate students and professors that we knew and asked them, do you have any students who you think might be a good fit? Even if they don't identify as disabled, do you have anyone that you see that you've had in your classes that you think might be a good fit for this program? So definitely utilizing those networks of connection is important too.
Thank you for those questions. And your responses. And I will call on Owen.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, I was, and this, I guess this is for Aysha. I was at the thing yesterday where you were talking about the UMN DCC, and I don't know if you didn't get into that as much yesterday, but I missed the part. So I guess to follow up from the previous question about like, wow, that's like a totally student run thing. I'm just curious, can you go into more like the structure of that? Like, is like, so I guess, so they just give you your own space and the students run it? Is there funding that the students can hire a staff member or something, or is it, and are there any trade-offs with, like, I mean, I guess there's like a lot of advantages, obviously, of having, you know, like, I guess the autonomy and, you know, and that kind of thing to have students run it, or is there, I mean, are all those things do those things play out well enough? But I mean, are there disadvantages to that, like not having like as much of an established thing, or not having like the support or continuity of a staff person or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah, so it definitely presents unique advantages and disadvantages. So a lot of the funding that we get is from student services funds. So that's a tiny portion of student tuition that goes to student groups. We don't hire anybody outside. We don't really hire anybody from the community to do things like finances. We rely on a board of 10 or so students with different designated roles like event planner, finance, president, etc. And it's a very horizontal structure in that even the president and vice president, they're on an equal plane. They're on an equal plane with the rest of the board members, and then the board members as a whole, in terms of like how, in terms of authority or how much of a voice we have, we're not that big of a step up from just general attendees or general members, because we don't want our small handful of voices to be the ones that are always representing the DCC, because we understand that there is a huge diversity and 10 people cannot cover that whole broad spectrum that is disability and disability justice. We don't get paid, so all of our funding goes to stuff like events and supplies and stuff like that. So yeah, I think one of the disadvantages of having a mostly student run and mostly undergraduate run specifically is high turnover. There are people always graduating or transferring, or sometimes they withdraw because of different student commitments that they have. So turnover is higher than you would expect with compared to something run by the institution. But we again make up for that by reaching out to prospective students. So even before people enter the University of Minnesota, just gaining their interest in potentially becoming a board member. And then I'm just reading the chat. Do students leaders say take volunteer shifts for keeping the office open during whatever the posted hours are? Yeah, so all the student leaders have set office hours. So they have to serve 3 to 4 hours a week each at these set times. And then we do have a system of communication in case somebody needs a substitute or someone to cover for them. And yeah, 1 second, let me gather my train of thoughts. Yeah, and another sort of unique thing about our structure is that graduate students who are disabled are actually all together. They have their own organization within the University of Minnesota, but then they are closely affiliated with the DSCC, since the DSCC is then the one that has a liaison to our like Disability Resource Center and our university clinics and other departments like that. So I guess the TLDR. It's a more horizontal structure, and then it's also web-like in that we have all of these different affiliate groups dedicated to specific disabilities or disabled demographics, and then these different networks connecting us to departments within the university, or people within university administration, and yeah. We don't get paid. It's completely voluntary.
All right, we still have about, let me see, there's no hands raised. We still have about 10 minutes for Q&A if anyone has any further questions. We do have a question in the chat. I will read that. Oh, I think Aysha got, let me put you back on spotlight. There you are. Question is, was the event Aysha mentioned about other cultural understandings of neurodiversity, was that done online, or is there any public recording of that?
So that was a hybrid event. We didn't record it because we were aware that that's not something that a lot of people in our community happen to be comfortable with. So it was hybrid. Some people on Zoom, some people came in person where we had like catering from a Mex place. And yeah, it was pretty informal, but it definitely provided that space, not just for autistic people in different marginalized communities to talk about their experiences, but also for neurotypical people to come in and ask questions without judgment, even if the questions were pretty basic or coming from a place of misunderstanding. So yeah. Not really, because this was, so I don't really have any slides or materials that I can share because this was the first time doing that this year. It was a pretty informal dialogue. I think the only guideline that I would have is don't assume malice, especially from a non-disabled person when they ask you a question about disability or disability justice. Don't assume malice because people are coming from different backgrounds with varying levels of knowledge. So in order to facilitate that conversation and creating a welcoming environment to ask, you would answer as if like a board member, another board member kind of made it the comparison of answer as if you're talking to somebody who spent their whole life on a deserted island and just joined civilization. Oh, and also a good way to bring people in is food, get catering.
Yes. I was a former student leader when I had my own version of my own student organization. Free food is great. I was, Rushi has a question for all the speakers. I was wondering how and if family engagement has have ever been a focus on your important on-campus work as student leaders in advancing disability identity, disability culture, and disability justice? So this is for Dan, Sylvie, and Aysha, in terms of if there's any family engagement while working with student leaders.
This is Sylvie. So there's two ways to answer that. So the first one is we would have these DCC 101s over the summer where we would try to reach out to incoming students who were coming to campus for orientation. And they were doing a sort of training with the Disability Resource Center, which is where students get accommodations. And we linked up with them to be on their tour so that they would come to the Disability Cultural Center and see. And those groups were largely parents with their children, or even just parents without their kids sometimes. So that was one place. But then sort of in an opposite way, one of our most popular discussions in the Undoing Ableism series that we had was right before Thanksgiving each year. We would have a disability and family and dealing with family members around your disability conversation. And that was always really well attended, and students especially seemed to relate to this idea of having difficulty or differences of opinion with their parents about their disability, and sort of everyone at this time in life is like trying to work out what an adult relationship with your parents means. So yes, we did do some outreach to parents, but we also did some targeted programming around the difficulties one could have with one's own parents.
This is Dan. We haven't had any specific programming yet that involves parents and family members, but we did work with our students that are involved in our DCC on a pre-semester program for disabled students. And part of that was similarly to what was shared a little bit ago about, how can we bring parents and family members through the orientation process. We invited parents and family members to be a part of our first night of that pre-semester program, which included a dinner, some get to know you things, and then we did a showing of Crip Camp followed by discussion. So parents and family members were involved in that, which led to some really rich conversation around disability identity, community, culture, some of those conversations. And for some parents that grew up during this time, still to this day have no idea of kind of what work went into disability rights and activism during that time period. So it was a really rich conversation for that, and we will be doing that again in this upcoming fall. So I think it's definitely something that we can continue to evolve, and appreciate the question because there's lots of value, and I'm glad to hear there's other ways that we can expand the reach beyond just students, but also their family members.
This is Aysha. So we don't really have any direct family engagement because I guess, genre of disabled people that usually come to us are people who are seeking diagnoses against their parents' wishes, or they have it and they don't tell their parents, or their parents aren't supportive of their disability. So what we kind of do is, again, more of a conversational approach where we draw a lot of inspiration and methods from our LGBTQ Student Cultural Center for how to approach parents and families with the topic of disability when they're not supportive. And so that can include anything from seeking diagnoses and resources under the radar because of, again, possible safety concerns within the family, and also includes things such as quote unquote coming out as disabled and how to do that and how to start those often difficult and deeply personal conversations. And when we do have families that are supportive, then we take the approach of reassurance and reassuring them that their offspring has a supportive community here at the U, and then also guiding them to what resources they can use and who else they can connect with to learn more. And we give lots of practical advice, such as how to deal with professors who don't listen to accommodations, or navigating the physical campus. So it's so yeah, I guess a lot of it is what we're able to do as students with what we know and the abilities that we have.
Alrighty, we are at the end of our time, but thank you all for those great questions. Thank you everyone for joining us for the session on centering student leadership and engagement. Thanks to the Access workers and to our lovely panelists, Dan, Sylvie, and Aysha. All right, we'll be taking a break until, actually, I want to say something first. I see Owen has a comment. If you're looking to get contact with Ahead stuff or a Dream, here's Wendy Harbor's email. She's like the supervisor of that program, I believe. And Rushi had a question on community engagement and off-campus partners. There is an event that's happening at 5 o'clock, so in a few hours from now. One of those is based on community engagement off-campus partners. It's called Building Partnerships on and Off Campus. So please do check out that event. So, but for now, we'll be taking a break until 3:30 p.m. Central, which is about 30 minutes from now. And we'll come back together in the main Zoom room for a panel about different kinds of programming existing DCCs have offered, what's gone well, and what we've learned. So thank you all, and we'll see you very soon.